Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Children's Select Committee here at Wiltshire Council. Before anything else, do we have any apologies for this morning, please?
Yes, Chairman, we've got a few apologies. So Councillor Helen Belcher, OBE, is being substituted by Councillor Carbin today. Also, Laura Mays, Cabinet Member, and Suzanne Wickham, portfolio holder, also send apologies.
Lovely.
And did I mention John Hawkins as well? Also send apologies. Yes.
I know that Laura and her portfolio holders are at the Wiltshire Learning Alliance today, so I think it was just an impossible clash of diary, and I did receive an apology from her for not being able to attend. So minutes of the previous meeting. Minutes of the previous meeting are here. Did anybody have any issues or objections with anything in them? No, are you all happy? I can sign those after the meeting. It's a true and accurate record. Superb. Declarations of interest. Did anyone have any disclosable declarations of interest they needed to? No? Okay. Chair's announcements. We're going to run today's meeting just slightly differently. The first substantive item we've got on the agenda, which we're going to come to in just a second, is one that we've been talking about for a wee while, and it's the report back from Oxford Brookes. And I wanted to make sure we had enough time to properly cover this. So we're going to take this item first. It's probably going to take about a third of the meeting time-wise. So what we'll do is we'll take this item and then just have a 5-minute break after that and then reconvene again. And we will take up the full time slot today, I think, for the meeting. So I hope you brought your sleeping bags. And if it's environmental health that's on this afternoon. It's health this afternoon. Oh, it's staffing this afternoon. If you're on the staffing committee, I hope to get you out in time to get into it. Okay. Any public participation? No, okay. Oh, sorry, Chair's announcements. I meant to say one other item on Chair's announcements, actually, which was last week was the LGA conference in Bournemouth. I was delighted to be able to attend a session led by Nettie up in the corner there, and Laura Mays talking about how we use data at Wiltshire Council to help. And you all know my love affair with data. So I think it was fantastic that we were boasting how we use data in our decision making and the way it was working. And actually, there was a lot of interest from other people who were present in the presentation. And I thought you did a superb job. So well done, Nettie. Thank you very much. Okay, so public participation, you said there was none?
Yeah, no public participation, Chairman.
So we'll move straight on then to our safeguarding processes and the outcome of the review by the Institute of Public Care. So Wiltshire Council commissioned the Institute of Public Care, or IPC, at Oxford Brookes University to undertake a follow-up review of support and safeguarding services across the county. The review was undertaken between July 22 and February 23, and the summary findings are in the attached report. There's quite a lot I would like to say about the report, but I'm going to leave them to present it first. I think it is a very positive report, although there does lead some things in there. But I'm going to ask Jen Salter and Professor Katie Birch, who's the Assistant Director of the Institute of Public Care at Oxford Brookes University, to present the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to swiftly pass on to the author and hand over to Katie.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me now? Great. Many thanks for inviting me along this morning. I'm really pleased to be here to present the findings from the review that I led and worked on with colleagues at the Institute of Public Care. Just to check, we got the slides, materials that, fantastic. I won't go over the introduction that's already been made, but just to say by way of introduction that this is the kind of work that I lead and we undertake at IPC fairly regularly. So at any one time, we're working with around 3 or 4 local authorities undertaking reviews of this nature. We also work for central government, particularly Department for Education. And of course, as noted, the review was undertaken end of last year and early stages of this year. So we're a couple of months out of date, if you like, and things do move on quite quickly. But hopefully my colleague sitting to my right can help out if there's questions about things that may have happened more recently. So if we can move into the slides, if people can see them. I'll just keep talking. So as mentioned, the rationale for this review in Wiltshire was fundamentally that we'd been involved about 3 years ago in an initial review, independent review of support and safeguarding services in Wiltshire. So that was 2019. And, you know, we were 3 years down the track, and quite understandably, colleagues within the local authority thought it'd be a good opportunity to invite us back in to see how things are now. So what's moved on, what's improved, what are some of the newer challenges, particularly during and post-COVID, and how well have they been met? We were asked, oh, that looks like a positive sign. I wonder if we can make that side a bit bigger. But that's it, we're on the next slide. The second one there. We were asked to look in particular at 4 things. So firstly, to look at children and families presenting needs. So these are children and families presenting to the local authority as needing support or safeguarding. So we were looking particularly post-COVID at those needs. The second, and I would say the fundamentally most important question, was, are children and families getting the right help at the right time, including at key decision points along a journey into and through services? We were also asked to look at the quality of support and safeguarding plans and services and social work practice and the practice of other key professionals, including key workers. And finally, the 4th question was, how effective are some of the supports that are in place, supervision and other supports for effective practice? So with that in mind, next slide, looking at what did we do? So what did the review involve? As you'd expect, we looked a little bit at the beginning at some of your performance data and trends, and we also refreshed our memories with respect to Ofsted standards. So looking at some of the most recent Ofsted inspections, looking in particular at some of the criteria for good to outstanding local authorities and how they've been evaluated by inspectors. We undertook a 360 review of your front door, your integrated front door arrangements. So we did some observations of how things are working there. We did quite a lot of case file sampling, and we also did some interviews with people working in and around your front door. We took a 2-pronged approach to looking at practice once children, if you like, are in the system. So we undertook a deep dive of decision-making, key decision-making, safeguarding decision-making fundamentally. And then we also looked in more depth at the whole child journey when children are coming into either your support arm of support and safeguarding or the safeguarding arm. And then we undertook, well, as you'll see there, a number of interviews, almost 30 interviews with people working from within the council. So these are social work practitioners, other practitioners, team managers. And then we also did some interviews with some of your key partners from outside the local authority. And I would say about that methodology, this is really in-depth. Okay, this is much more in-depth than, say, an inspection in terms of the numbers and the depth of our review. So what did we find? Just looking first at the presenting needs of children and young people and families coming into your system. So post-COVID, so from around midway through last year, what we've seen from the data is that regrowth in the number of people contacting the local authority, including family members, and also formal referrals into your services. And this is very similar pattern to elsewhere in the country in terms of that pickup. When we looked at rates of children starting to be looked after in Wiltshire, we can see a pattern that's lower than some of your neighbours geographically, but when we compared against outstanding local authorities across England, this is a very similar proportion per 10,000 children in the population. Compared with those compared with outstanding authorities. So we thought that was quite an interesting comparison to make. We looked at across our in-depth case file sampling and through interviews with people who were involved in this whole system, we looked at some of the factors that seem to be potentially increasing demand for services. Support and safeguarding services, particularly post-COVID. So there's clearly some poverty-related factors that are playing their part. I'm sure you will have thought about this as a committee quite a lot post-COVID and also pre. We're also seeing some trends around older children not wanting to return to school or some issues with school attendance. Also increases in reported domestic abuse and substance misuse. And again, these are very similar trends to across the country, a very strong hypotheses around domestic abuse and substance misuse getting worse within families during the COVID period. There's also some evidence from the review that your key partner agency resources have been stretched. And also other factors that may affect increases in demand that are suggested by many of them and your council staff is that actually your partners are getting more informed about safeguarding, better informed, arguably, about safeguarding and when to make a referral. And then there's some other factors that potentially are having a downward pressure, if you like, on demand. And a key one here is a reduction in the number of children and families who were re-referred into your support and safeguarding, particularly safeguarding services. And that's a key one that we'll come back to shortly. And also some evidence of more effective step downs from your statutory services into community services and improvements in partnership working. So that's a kind of mixed picture in terms of drivers for demand there. I want to just drill down into focus on disability because there were a number of findings from our review that I think are important to note in terms of the characteristics of children and families coming into and through your services. So when we looked at the decision-making cases, 14% of those 80 children we looked at had a diagnosed disability, mostly autistic spectrum disorder or ADHD. When we looked at that broader sample of whole child journeys, it was a slightly higher rate, about a fifth, 21%. And that's when we incorporated, if you like, the targeted early help or the support arm of your service. And then when we looked at the front door, through the front door review, it was about a third actually of referrals related in some way to parental worries about child behaviour. And mostly that was linked with questions about diagnosed or more commonly undiagnosed ASD or ADHD. And then through conversations with your staff, they were fairly consistently describing how these were presentations that they were seeing more frequently. So that sort of tied in really with what we'd seen through our own deep dive. I just want to move us on. I know that you've had the papers, by the way, so this is I'm just touching base with the findings, the key findings here, as opposed to going into a lot of depth. So you'll remember that key question, which was around, are children and families in Wiltshire getting the right help at the right time? And we looked at this question through a number of angles. One key angle is awareness rates, particularly amongst your partners, of thresholds and threshold criteria, and when essentially to refer a child, particularly with a safeguarding concern. And we found that all staff and almost all partners who participated in an interview were either aware or very aware of your threshold documentation, and could describe how they or colleagues had received training on it. A number described how they were using that documentation regularly to make some ratings, if you like, of what to do with a concern about a child, and particularly when thinking about a referral into your integrated front door. And most staff and partners thought that your thresholds, if you like, it's not a statutory threshold, but your thresholds for children receiving a targeted support service, thought that was clear or very clear. But of course, it's going to be a bit grayer because those levels merge inevitably with some of your more community-based early help support for families. Again, looking at indicators, the next slide, indicators of success, if you like, in terms of children and families getting the right help at the right time. These included your child protection investigations and plans coming down nicely in trends since we were last with you, and increases in your early help involvements in the community. So that's a good trend, generally speaking. We checked that against trends elsewhere, particularly amongst outstanding local authorities again. And we could see that your rates are slightly higher than some outstanding, your rates, this is for child protection plans, by the way, are slightly higher than some outstanding authorities, and about the same as others. So that was really just a check on that message that the downward pressure on child protection plans is good. We looked at I mentioned earlier, we looked at your integrated front door. Excuse the obvious image here, a nice friendly front door, nice colours there and foliage. Just to touch base with some of the important things, this is quite a complex area, your front door, and just checking, is it working well? I suppose one of the key findings that we thought was very reassuring with respect to our overall finding that we think your front door's working well is that your partners think that they can challenge. This is really important. So if they feel that you've not got it right at the integrated front door, they can say, ask questions about it. They can challenge. We saw some really timely handling of referrals, which is really important, contacts and referrals, some really good follow-ups from referrals, including, sensitive conversations with parents. We thought it was a really consistent triage at your front door into one of a range of pathways beyond the front door. And we saw some really good, strong oversight of what was going on. So overall, that was a really, we think that's a real strength of your arrangements. We looked, of course we did, at decision-making beyond the front door. And this next image is really just to demonstrate how we would like to characterise the arrangements that you've got, which is highly connected, making sure that children aren't falling through the gaps so that they continue to get the right help at the right time. It's really difficult to get it right, that onward journey at the front door every time. With the best will in the world, relatively limited information. And sometimes when professionals go in and find out a little bit more, actually you can make a better decision about what kind of plan that child needs, whether it's early help or statutory. Again, we found that practitioners, both within and outside the council services, felt listened to and able to challenge. So, for example, if someone working in early help thought that the case should really that child really needed a safeguarding plan, but it was considered, and there was a decision that for now, perhaps no, continue to hold in early help. They could challenge that. Also, we found that partnership working was really good. There's that flexibility to move children between levels, and crucially, without having to start from scratch again, because we've seen in other areas where children are moved around the system, but every time they go into a new part of the whole system, they have to start telling their story again and start from scratch. And actually, that it seems really simple, part of your model, but actually we don't see that elsewhere, that it's really held in that way. And we also feel that's really important, particularly in the challenging world of social worker recruitment, this ongoing challenging area for all local authorities to recruit and retain experienced social workers, particularly at the front line. So the fact that you've got experienced family support workers and stable teams of family support workers who can, if you like, provide that consistency wherever the family moves around the system is really important. With in mind decision-making beyond the front door, of course, we looked at assessments and the quality of those more in-depth assessments that happen beyond the front door. We thought this was really good, and I can talk more about some of the attributes of those assessments, but there's an awful lot of detail in the report. But essentially, this is voices being heard and represented in the assessments, really, really strong analysis, clear chronologies, you know, being really clear about why, what should happen and why. We saw really good contributions from partners to key strategic decision-making fora. Really well attended, mostly really well attended in the first instance for child protection conferences. We were a little bit concerned about a drop-off in attendance for the final child protection conferences. I can understand why it happens, and people are providing reports. So their, if you like, their experience of the child and family is still being represented at that decision making. And they may feel as though they've already had that wind up, if you like, to the final decision making. But still, we thought, particularly given that some child health needs can be ongoing, we wondered whether that might be something to be strengthened. And then also with in mind decision-making and support services beyond the front door and that overall thinking about right help at the right time, we thought also that the responsiveness of some of your commissioned services for key parts of child and family needs, particularly domestic abuse and substance misuse, had dropped off a bit. And it's a bit tricky because this was in the immediate aftermath of COVID restrictions and moving away from that, when a lot of services around the country had moved to more virtual support. But a lot of the families who are coming into your support and safeguarding services are really quite vulnerable, and not all of them need virtual support. Sometimes they need one-to-one. And there was that little bit lack of flexibility, really, and some families who were having to wait for those services. And given how likely they are to have domestic abuse and substance misuse needs, you know, really high proportions in your, particularly in your safeguarding services, have those needs. We thought that was an area really also to strengthen. Looking at the main gaps in support, and again, this is really closely triangulated across the case file sampling and interviews. These were the three areas that stood out as being gaps, if you like, to think about. There was certainly a gap around adult mental health and emotional well-being. I've mentioned substance misuse and domestic abuse, but the other third area that is strongly characterised, if you like, in families coming into your support and safeguarding services is adult mental health. And often they don't meet the criteria for really high level mental health supports, but their needs are a bit beyond perhaps sometimes some of the services that are available through IAT. So that felt like a bit of a gap, really. And similarly, and this I'm sure will become of no surprise because this is a problem throughout the the country really is child mental health and emotional well-being, arguably, and there's strong evidence for this now, worsened since the pandemic. And lots of different ways in which this is being manifested. And again, the gap between what might be available universally, including, say, through schools even, and some of the more specialist, including child and adolescent mental health services, CAMS. So again, that gap. And again, we saw some of your social workers and family support workers trying to secure those services for children and not being able to. You know, I think probably there were some examples also of them not even trying because they know, you know, it's not going to happen. So, you know, and they're working really creatively to try and fill those gaps, but ultimately they are gaps. And then the third area was support for children with diagnosed or suspected autistic spectrum disorder or ADHD. This kind of level, the level of need was described by some staff and stakeholders as being overwhelming. And the reality is that the burden of that work seems to be falling mostly on your family support workers to fill. Now, they're very experienced and they work very creatively, but I suppose there's a risk that their training is mainly generic. They have to touch a lot of bases. They have to be able to do some domestic abuse work, not substance misuse, but parenting work, supporting the child sometimes and parents. They may not have the specialist training that's required. And actually parenting a child on the autistic spectrum requires different approaches. It's not a generic parenting approach. Apologies if I'm teaching grandmas to suck eggs here, but I just wanted to make that point. There was an alternative view amongst people contributing to an interview, which is that some children with less complex special educational needs locally have actually more options than before. So quite a good offer of some courses and activities to do, particularly during school holidays. So it's a bit of a mixed picture here, but a major stumbling block was thought by most people to be actually getting a diagnosis that just can take ages, and then what to do in the meantime, and is there any support in the meantime when it's strongly suspected that and for children with neurodiversity. So I want to move on to practice, and again the picture. Sorry if I sound like a stuck record, but the picture is again mostly really good here. So some of the indicators, if you like, a starting point for looking at practice and where inspectors and others tend to alight in terms of their interest. A really good indicator is low rates of re-referrals, particularly into safeguarding services, because that's an indicator that families have been worked, if you like, really well. And so either a decision is made that the child needs to become looked after, or a really good piece of work's done with children and families that enables them to sustain a good level of parenting. Other indicators are good timescales for doing things, obviously, not letting things drift. Relatively low rates of children needing to become looked after, and some of the rates around permanent social workers in post and caseloads. So that's our starting point. But what did we find when we looked in depth? So next slide just covers some of that. So we thought overall that the practice, this is social work practice, and the practice of others involved in supporting children with support and safeguarding plans. This is improved again. So it was good when we came 3 years plus ago. But it's improved again, and I suppose a key element of that is the consistency. So we saw some really outstanding examples of practice last time, but we were seeing more examples and more examples of consistently good practice. And just you'll see on this slide here some of the attributes of that. So really strong relationship-based and strengths-based solutions, focused practice, being trauma-informed and attachment-aware, really holistic assessments, looking not just at the family members who are all immediately presenting. It can be really tempting just to focus on those who are in your first sort of view, but looking beyond that are there other family members in the background here who might either play a positive part or who we need to be concerned about, or a bit of both? There's quite good consistency of lead worker. It's more so in your support services, but pretty good in your safeguarding service as well. And really good outcomes in many cases. Just to reiterate again, we think having that mixed team makes a big difference here. So this isn't just about social work practice. This is about your practice of your social workers and your family key workers and all of the supports around. And then just finally, touching base with the supports for effective practice, which are really important and really key indicators of a really excellent service. So as a bottom line, we're always looking for really good supervision arrangements and really consistent supervision, particularly of social workers. And social workers who describe that as happening regularly and that it's positive for them. And we certainly found that here. There are a number of ways in which your staff are describing your service really positively. Some of the other things that they mentioned that go beyond the kind of, if you like, the basics, doing the basics really well. So role-specific support groups in place, and also your TRIM service. This is your therapeutic trauma-related service that provides support for staff who are affected by their work and what they've seen and experienced. And, you know, there's the potential, at least, for them to have been traumatized by that. And that's been really well received by your staff. And people are aware of it, even if they haven't used it. And those who have used it think it's really good. So that's, in a nutshell, our findings. I mean, we didn't have many areas to suggest to improve, but some of those that I've described already will be the ones that you'd expect. So your partner attendance at your CP conferences, continuing getting that up. Thinking about the step downs into early help services outside in the community, making sure the information is really quick and really slick on that. Reviewing the availability of your key supports, particularly domestic abuse, substance misuse, and working together with your partners to find some creative solutions to the issues around the availability of child and parent emotional health and wellbeing services, and also for children on the autistic spectrum and with ADHD. So those are the challenges. You could say, why didn't our reviewers come up with the creative solutions? But actually, we think, you know, they're really best explored locally. And we think you've got good partnerships there to do some of that, but it's really challenging. Thanks for your time. I'm assuming you'll have some questions for me, but I'll switch off.
Oh, trust me. Thank you. And thank you for the in-depth report back this morning. And thank you for coming to do it in person. It's so much better to be able to review one of these when you've got the author there and you can ask it, rather than if you're trying to interpret through so many people. What have I done? Yeah. So, questions. Who do I have with questions out there? I've got Bridget, then I've got, is Joe's hand up there? Then I've got Joe and I've got Jackie, and trust me, I've got me. Bridget.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always interested when I hear you talking about partners, and just wonder how much youth services, where there are some, ever get involved in any of these key decisions, and in particular on the child and adolescent mental health. We were well aware, we are very fortunate in South West Wiltshire that we have a fantastic local charity set up by one of our former youth workers. So she is well attuned to council processes, but now feels that because she's no longer part of the council, there's a bit of a blockage there. She's also been obviously well aware over COVID that there has been an increase in child and adolescent mental health issues in our local area. And I was particularly frustrated that being thwarted, frankly, not by anybody here, but I wanted to use the youth grant that we had left over in the area board grant process to provide some local counselling, which I thought would actually be a very good example of perhaps a local solution to some of these issues. But that was thwarted, not by anybody within this, the children's services elsewhere in the council, but it would have been a very good use of local money that we had to provide some additional child and adolescent mental health, just some counselling to stop things escalating so that these children, we're all well aware that the queues or trying to get any help from CAM service is really difficult. So providing some local support could have prevented some of these children, their situation escalating or whatever. So I just wanted to make a comment about that, that I think there are ways in which there are local solutions, and I think we should be encouraged to try and find them.
Can I just add to Bridget's comment, because the worker that she's referring to said something in another meeting I was at, and I said, can I quote you on that? And they said yes, so I will, which is that they felt particularly since they had left the employment of the council, they had, in the eyes of the council's social work team, been deprofessionalised. In so much as when they were a youth worker working for the council, they could have gone along to the MASH, had a chat with somebody in the MASH and said, I've got a concern here. That option no longer exists for them. And if they phone in, then they're not treated as a fellow professional who's degree qualified in working with young people, blah, 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 but they're just treated as a member of the public. And I would echo that concern that worker has expressed, because I've seen that through the service that I run. So I'd echo that point. I think sometimes when we talk to the community, we sometimes don't actually talk to the community. We talk to some county-wide representatives who are meant to represent people from the community, but actually have no idea what's happening on the front line.
I'll just respond to the first question very, very briefly. In terms of, I think you asked whether we saw any youth services involved in decisions. I mean, the honest answer is where they needed to be. But you'll probably be aware that for the most part, with safeguarding decisions, particularly at the front door, this is mainly going to be the police, social services, health. They're the people who have those that they're immediately connected in or investigating. But where they need to, yes, we have seen some examples. But I'm going to hand over to Lucy to respond more broadly.
Yeah, so just more broadly, I mean, I think in terms of the kind of our partners that work in the community, I mean, Jen would say, you know, specifically on a case, if there was someone in, you know, the service that you're referring to, Bridget, they would absolutely be invited into, you know, strategy discussions, et cetera, where relevant. That's what should happen. I mean, obviously we can take away the comment that you made there, John. We wouldn't expect people to feel left to feel like that if they're working with young people. They know them very well. It's similar to schools. We accept that schools know, you know, these children really well. They're going in every day, and similar, you know, in terms of the relationships that youth workers build up with young people. We've obviously got task group around the youth provision, and well, more around the use of the area board grants and youth provision, because obviously that is our model in Wiltshire. I think it will be, let's see what the outcome of that task group is, but I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't some sort of recommendation around the interface from the council with this, you know, wider sort of resource out there. And I think there is more that we can do in that space. So, you know, we can absolutely look at that. And in terms of the mental health provision, absolutely, you know, we are well aware in terms of the needs of our young people. And we work very closely with the ICB, so Health, who are the lead, you know, commissioners around mental health provision. We are looking at and reviewing our model. We've had papers here previously. There will be, you know, more papers coming back in terms of what we do in that regard going forward. I'm the chair of the Integrated Care Alliance, which is our kind of partnership with health at a place level, also includes some reps from the volunteer community sector who are representing the whole. And I know that isn't necessarily the same as having individual, providers in the room. But we are looking at mental health, and we had a workshop about a month, 6 weeks ago on that specific issue. So we are progressing it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And I hope it does, because I just think that, if an area board or whoever has got some funding, if you can start something off really quickly so that some of these young people can be seen quickly by somebody locally, because we're in a particularly rural area, so travelling to get mental health services is difficult. So we want to bring somebody into our area, but we want to do it in a very timely fashion. And of course, it must have a beneficial effect in that the sooner these young people are seen, then the quicker they can get their problems sorted out or whatever, and prevents that from escalating and from there being an increased need further down the road because it has got out of control. So I just think if we can get support for some of these things, positive support rather than the negativity, not through anybody in your area, that I have experienced over the past few months, then it would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I think Joe was next.
Thank you, John. Right, I've got a couple of questions around comments about schools made and the connections into schools. So I'm going to try and find my place in the document, so bear with me. So the first comment is on page 3, which talks about the factors with the potential to reduce demand. I did have to have a wry smile. There is a comment that says schools becoming more accepting of step downs. Now, more accepting actually sounds like grin and bear it, but actually just got to deal with it. And I suspect that's possibly, it might have been what it meant, but is that also more about schools understanding better some of the processes? And I'm conscious that our teams work very, very closely with schools, and schools have got some significant specialisms. But I would be interested to understand what that phrase we really meant by that, rather than just, suck it up. And then actually looking at where you had the 14 key findings, number 14 on that was schools appeared to be more enthusiastic about taking the lead for an ESA, where the issues were obviously focused on the child's behaviour in school, and less enthusiastic where the issues were predominantly community, whole family or adult focused. And my immediate thought again is kind of, well, that's kind of what I would expect. I wouldn't expect the schools to feel enthusiastic about doing something that's outside of working with young people. But again, I'm not sure with that comment whether there was we felt there was a trick being missed, or there was something, or whether it's just a comment. I've got just a couple more in there because they're all based around some of the same things, really. On the next point, which is 3.2.2, from case file sampling, that talks about approximately 1/3 of children receiving a form of local authority plan, blah, 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 of school journeys had been referred by schools, linked perhaps with the ESA findings. These children were more likely to receive a support plan compared with children referred by other agencies, like the police or community health. Now, is that because there is greater specialism within those schools, and is that something we can leverage in other agencies somehow? It's just trying to understand. I appreciate I'm picking at little bits. And then a couple of paragraphs down. No, ignore that. No, I think let's leave those, I think, where we are.
That's great. Thanks so much for your questions. And I think it's probably worth saying a little bit by way of context about the first two, which are about that relationship with schools and their contribution to early support and understanding how it all sort of fits together. The context is that when we reviewed your support and safeguarding services 3 years plus ago, it was difficult. Schools were more enthusiastic to, if you like, refer children in to your support and safeguarding services, and less enthusiastic, including compared with other local authorities, to undertake some support, if you like, a team around the child approach, and take a lead role for that. So that's the context that perhaps should have drawn out a bit more in the report. So hence the more enthusiastic, less enthusiastic. There's a bit of a shorthand. Apologies for that. I mean, absolutely understand the pressures on schools. And the accepting isn't grudgingly accepting. You know, that's a literal accepting of some of those step downs. So a piece of work has been done. It's been completed. That child no longer needs a statutory plan or a targeted early help plan. And what they need is for the school to be aware that they still have got some, most children do continue to have some ongoing needs, and understanding that role that they would have, pastorally or otherwise. So that's really, in relation to those first two queries, where that comes from. So apologies, should have said a bit more by way of context. In terms of the case file sampling and finding the third of local authority plans that were referred by schools, I think that was that received an early help as opposed to statutory. That's an interesting one, but it's not, if you think about it, it's not unusual, because the police are more likely to refer for a safeguarding issue, and schools are more likely to refer when they have concerns that are building, but actually there's not an out-and-out safeguarding issue. So I mean, it was really just something for your colleagues to note, and that we found this. You know, often we do that in our reporting, because sometimes if you miss something, and you know, that might be relevant, it's really worth just reporting on it, so that, you know, because they'll be keeping an eye on these sorts of trends ongoing, and it was something that we found that was interesting, but not a worry as such. So that was really I think that was your last query. But it's not an indication that your schools, if you like, you know, getting tracked into a different form of support on a standard basis. It's, you know, going back to what we found at the front door, you know, with the right journeys that can then be changed if things change later. That's the key bit, really.
And just to add, so I think what's really helpful having, you know, Oxford Brookes in is that, as Katie said, they work with lots of different local areas. So, you know, we know what we're doing in Wiltshire, and we obviously also need to look out to see not only how we compare, but where there's other, you know, things that are working really well, we can learn from it, etc. And I think, you know, just to kind of pick up on that point in terms of Katie's experience of other schools in other areas, and that's not about being critical about our schools, because we know that everyone, and that was pointed out in the presentation, all our partners, everyone is under pressure, and that becomes very difficult. And actually, when the sort of Family Key Worker Service was initially set up, we became sort of victims of our own success, and the schools thought it was brilliant, and of course refer in, and families get this support. But equally, when you look at the sort of spectrum in terms of social care, we should only be working with those families that, you know, meet the threshold. So as soon as you have more in at the lower threshold, you're going to push up and have more in the higher threshold. And so it goes on. And actually, that's not fair on families. You know, they don't want social workers involved if they don't need to be. And we need to use what community resources we've got. So that's, you know, really important. And that's what it is that we're, you know, trying to achieve. We're working with the families that we absolutely need to, because they meet our threshold and they need that level of service. And what can we do in terms of working and supporting schools? So, I mean, I won't go into the detail. Jen could talk more about, but, you know, the Westbury Warminster pilot, the work that we're doing in the family, in fact, the developments around the family hubs that you heard last time, etc. That's all part of our strategy to support the schools in sort of being able to support families.
Sorry, I should just also say, and I forgot, that in our report, you'll have seen that we mentioned the link workers and the links between particular social workers in different locality teams. And that, again, is not something we see elsewhere, always being undertaken consistently. And both schools and people working in the social work teams talked about how important that link was. And I'm sure that's really helped to build that trust, so that when a child is being stepped down from a statutory plan, the schools know that, oh, there's still someone I can talk to if actually things get worse again, or if I'm worried. So it's all about that trust, really, I think.
Yes, thank you. It was, again, another very long, wordy report, which I enjoyed reading, but obviously there's lots of things that you pick out. And I think the essence of the report is telling us, as a committee, how well our officers are doing in delivering our services. And potentially there are things there for us to be worried about, for us to then pick up as a committee, to then talk to our officers about. So it's not something that you would be able to sort of give the answers. I mean, I picked up, one of the things that I found difficult is when you refer to sort of like 41 children out of 10,000 population. And then I'm trying to work something further down when you were talking about the child protection plans, that 30 plans were needed out of every 10,000 children. So it's trying to work out the relevance there for us. I mean, our officers understand it, but for us to understand, is that a problem? Should we be worried about this as to 30 out of every 10,000? And it would be perhaps better if we had the numbers rather than relating to, you know, percentages and all the other things. The ASD and the ADHD, one thing that I wondered was also, we talk about the ones that we are identifying we're working with, but do we know how many young people in our county have got these issues and their families are working successfully with them? What are they doing right, as to how we can learn from what they're doing, as to whether that helps those who need us to help? So I think these are things that we need to be looking at as a committee. You mentioned about other areas, other local authorities who are doing things well, as we are, but there's no mention about some of those examples. And perhaps, again, you've probably told our officers, but we don't know about, you know, where perhaps Oxford or Gloucester or Northampton or wherever, they're doing something really well, and are we going to be following their models? So whether that would be useful. The other thing that I wondered is whether we ever look at, as a council, how the extended families where they have negative things going on, how they're impacting children who then come into our services because of what's happening elsewhere in the extended families. You talked about where the extended families were doing well and supporting the families who are struggling, but we don't ever see why it is that perhaps a child suddenly becomes difficult because possibly they're being influenced further in an extended family, and whether we should be looking at that. But, you know, as I say, I think most of the stuff that's in this report is something that we need to look at as a committee to know that our officers are picking up on what was being mentioned, so that we can make sure that we improve if we can.
Thank you. And just to respond really quickly to each one in turn, I've been writing some notes. It's a summary report, so there's more detail available, if you like, mini reports that sit behind. It's really difficult to know what to put into the summary and what to leave out. The reason for highlighting rates rather than numbers is that numbers can be a bit misleading. Because of course, if you have a local authority area with a larger population, your numbers are going to be larger. So the key thing to report on is the rate per 10,000 children involved at different stages, if you like, of safeguarding and becoming looked after and being looked after. And it's those rates that, say, your Ofsted inspectors will look at. So that's why we've emphasised those, but the numbers are all behind them, and of course they're changing all the time, and that's why your colleagues here will be they look at this every month, and it's really important to keep on top of those trends. That's a real key feature of outstanding local authorities, where people are on it and looking out for trends as they arise. I thought you were absolutely spot on about your comment about ASD and ADHD in children, and understanding more about, where those children are, not just those that come into your integrated front door, and what supports are they accessing. In terms of the question about other local authorities doing well, it's really difficult because different local authorities do well at different things. So there are some things that you're doing here in Wiltshire that really would stand out as being excellent, even in relation to the, outstanding local authorities. I can't think that there's anything that some of those really good local authorities are doing that you're not at least on a really, quite a long way along a path to achieving, if not doing. I mean, when we compared you against Ofsted's outstanding features, you're ticking them basically. And the point about extended families and where they have a negative influence, apologies if I didn't emphasize that sufficiently, but what we were noticing was that whether children are coming into your early help, your support function, or your safeguarding functions, your workers are really looking to find out who is behind the scenes and may not be that immediate person, usually the immediate person's mum, to engage with. And but of course, often there's a father who's maybe not quite so easy to contact, but your workers are making, really trying to get in contact with fathers, and also that extended family who may offer support but may not. They may also, as you say, be having a negative influence, or it's mixed, as is often the case. It's neither good nor bad, it's mixed. And trying to make sense of that and trying to work out, how to work with that whole family, and who to draw into the family circle of support, which is part of planning. So yeah, very much is happening from what we saw.
Right. Did anybody else? No? Okay. I've just got a couple, but just before I ask my questions, I just want to say something about putting this report in context with what we've seen over the last perhaps 10 years, which has been an upward trend in the standards and the qualities of what we're receiving or what we're delivering for our young people in Wiltshire. But I don't think I've seen anything this positive in that time. And I really, although there are, and I'm about to ask a couple of questions, and there are things we will pick up on, I really do think that this absolutely marks a milestone in our journey of improvement since when certainly I got involved in this 10, 11 years ago, and we had the unsatisfactory. And we've now got a report which really shows that we're delivering for young people in Wiltshire. Of course, there will be things that we can do better. Of course, there will be things that some of us will challenge, because by the time you get to that level, sometimes it's about choices. And either choice could deliver good things for young people, but they deliver different things. But I think the quality of what we've got here, and I'm just saying this because I really wouldn't want a single member of our team to walk away from today's meeting thinking that this was seen as a negative report, or that there were things that were, there are things we'll pick out because that's our jobs. We're your critical friend. But bloody hell, this is a good report. And I think a massive congratulations is due to the whole of our children's services team for what's in it, because I can't remember having read something like this in this job since I've been in it. So well done, first of all. Second of all, is the number that Lucy and Jen, the question Lucy and Jen are expecting about numbers, because and I didn't see a specific reference to these ones, so I do want to ask the question, which is, members of this committee will have heard me banging on for probably a couple of years now about two specific numbers in our rates per 10,000, where we are an outlier. and these are the children currently looked after, where our figure is 43.2. Outstanding is at 59. Statistical neighbours are at 67. English average is 67, and good LAs are at 57. So we're way below all of those. And children in need, where we're at 238.3, and outstandings are at 300. The lowest of all of those is stat neighbours at 273, and both of the others are significantly higher. So my question is, when I was trained up on what to do on this, one of the things that was beat into me was you've got to look not only for where you're going too high, but also where you're going too low. And these consistently come under. I consistently ask, I get a consistent answer, and it's not, I don't disbelieve the answer, but it's my job to ask, which is our early help is effective, and that's stopping these numbers from coming in at this. But I didn't necessarily read that explicitly in the report, and therefore I'm still left wondering, why are those numbers in particular so much lower than everybody else's?
I'll just respond initially, and then I'll hand over to Lucy and Jen, colleagues, about the most up-to-date figures and how that... I mean, essentially, when it's really difficult, first off, to compare local authorities. All local authorities are different, even within a geographical footprint, even within a family, if you like, of local authorities. What we sought to do was to look at this from a range of angles. And again, in the summary report, we've drawn in what we think's relevant, including in the context of the narrative that sits underneath. So that in-depth review that we've done, and that's the important bit really, is to check out some of the questions that you've raised. The problem when comparing with all outstanding local authorities is you've got a number of local authorities in that group that are very, very different to Wiltshire. You know, these are highly, big cities, urban footprints, where the level of deprivation is much higher, quite frankly. So what we did was sought to draw out the local authorities that are outstanding, that are most alike Wiltshire, and that's what we thought was relevant to report on. And I still think that's right. I mean, I suppose the acid test is if you had inspectors come in tomorrow, would they agree? I mean, I think they would, because there are enough of your alike local authorities that are outstanding, that have rates, particularly the looked after rates, that are similar. And as I said, it's the important bit is the narrative underneath. So if we'd looked at your stats and found a very different narrative through the deeper dive, then we'd be a lot more worried about what you just described. But the narrative really fits that this is good practice, children getting the right help at the right time, and consistently. So I'm confident that those two nuggets, if you like, of information, of course, are selected. This is a summary report, that that's an accurate picture. So I don't know if Lucy or Jen want to say any more. I mean, it's really difficult to compare. You get all tied up in knots in comparing.
Yeah, obviously I'd like to say something, John. Yeah, I mean, apart from Ofsted coming in, there isn't anything else we can do to convince you. I think the numbers are what the numbers are. We've done a huge amount of work internally, as you know, and now we've obviously gone the step further in terms of an independent view on this. The only other view that we're waiting for is Ofsted. Obviously, when we had our last visit, it was a focus visit. It was specifically around care leavers, so that the rates were, in respect of children who'd kind of come through care, but there was no issue raised in that regard. In the last couple of annual conversations with Ofsted, they see our rates. We've talked about them. We've talked about why we're comfortable with them. And then I suppose just to add in terms of national policy and stable homes built on love, that, you know, we brought a report here in terms of our sort of positioning around that. The government is absolutely driving for children to be looked after by their family in their homes. We have a strong family help service that you've heard, you know, both internally, and we're working on that further with our partnerships. That is going to lead to lower rates of children in need because people are getting support earlier and it's having a greater impact. So, you know, I am comfortable with it. Jen's comfortable with it. We've had a report that is comfortable with it. I know that it is there, you know, for you, but I think short of Ofsted, you know, which we're keen and we're waiting for them to arrive. But equally, you know, we are never going to reach perfection. We've always got things to do, and we will continue focusing on the things that we need to do.
But I absolutely get that, and I was quite surprised there wasn't an entire chapter just on those two numbers to be surprised on review in the report to stop me asking the question. But it's, as I said in the intro, it's our job to ask the questions, and it's when we stop asking the questions that things go wrong. Whilst I hear what's said, forever that number will concern me because it indicates, well, it's an indicator of thresholds, if anything, isn't it? But you back it up with everything else around it. So as long as everything else around it is still saying and doing what it does now, then there's an adequate answer to the question. But when you can't answer it, that's when it becomes a challenge again, isn't it? So always the advantage of asking your questions at the end is a lot of people ask the questions that you're going to ask for you. So I won't bore everybody with asking questions that have already been asked. But there was one point I wanted to make, which kind of builds from Bridget's point at the beginning. But we, as a council, quite successfully use community-led models for a lot of our delivery. It does concern me that in using community-led models for a lot of our delivery, we don't include community-led partners in a lot of our feedback and a lot of our measurements and all the rest of it. So I just think that when we're undertaking the research, we're undertaking the fact-checking, we're undertaking the let's make sure everything's doing what it should be doing, we need to, if there's one piece of learning for me that comes out of this, because it's confirmed to a degree we're not doing it, we need to find a better way of how we communicate with those grassroots organisations like Seeds for Success down in South West Wiltshire, who are doing such good work, but aren't included in the, you know, let's go out and talk to people about, but they're the people on the front line who are actually doing this stuff for a lot of these young people now, and will give different feedback from places like schools, because have different relationships with those young people than places like schools have. So yeah, it's just the one bit of learning I'd really like to. Go on, Jen, tell me I'm wrong.
No, I was just going to add, and Simon's here, obviously we've got a report on facts, and the family help work and the pilot is exactly to tackle some of these challenges about how local communities can network and hear about what's happening and how we can support that with the digital platform, etc. So that really is a priority for us. We know that that is really tricky kind of in local areas, but that is the strategy, Family Help, to address that. And Katie's organisation are supporting in the evaluation of that. So the committee will obviously hear as that progresses.
Yeah, fair point. And in fairness to fact, they did come and speak to us about what was happening in Westbury. So that was... Okay, anybody got anything else they want to ask? Mike?
Thank you, John. I'm going to ask what I thought was perhaps an obvious question, and I'd like to echo what you said about what a positive report this is and how well all the officers have done to achieve that outcome. There are two main things that come out of that report for me, and the question to the officers is how are we going to improve the provision of support for substance abuse and adults and children mental health issues? That's the obvious question for me.
So as you'd expect, we are going to look at what actions we need to take from the recommendations, and the plan is to feed those into the service delivery plans. So that comes to this committee. A report came, I think it was a couple of months ago. So we'll, if it's acceptable, bring it back in terms of that fuller report and the service delivery, because some of the things that this report has highlighted were already in those plans and we're already working on. But there are some things, particularly with commission services, for one, that we do want to do more on and include that in that plan. And there is a new substance misuse contract. Now I can't think of the name, Connect. Or
Connect or Reconnect, but Public Health have just recommissioned an all age. So we can, we would expect to see changes through that delivery as well. We work very closely with Public Health, and we can always bring something specific on that if the committee's interested around children and young people.
I'm just being told what I'm thinking. Hold on. What am I thinking? Oh, yes, yeah. Okay, so, go on, Antonio.
Apologies in advance if I've missed the point of the report as well. I just wanted to ask a question about post-16 transition and why that wasn't sort of mentioned in the report. I don't know if I've missed the point of that, but there wasn't a mention of going from that, those vulnerable children going from that NEET to EAT sort of situation and receiving support in that regard, because many of them are going to be in situations where safeguarding is an issue.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, it didn't come out strongly as a feature. And we weren't focusing. It's really difficult. You could do a whole review around children with disabilities and coming into your systems, and we were basically looking at all ages, from right across all parts of the county. So it didn't come out strongly from the review that we undertook. I guess the other thing that you would notice is we didn't track children into the looked after space either. So it was focused on children before, if you like, before they become looked after.
Just to, forgot what my follow-up question was now. You said it didn't come out strongly. Is that because our NEET figures are lower than other counties or councils?
We didn't look at your NEET figures for the review in terms of our look at your data. We were focusing more on the safeguarding side. So the numbers coming in the front door and through those services. So unfortunately, we didn't focus on that. So I can't comment.
I think the challenge, Antonio, is that with children's services, you can look at the same thing through so many different lenses, and track through on. So this report was looking at safeguarding and the journey of the child or through our system in safeguarding, which is very different than if you're looking at it from educational attainment, or if you're looking at it from transitions from either primary to secondary or secondary to tertiary sector. So I think that in fairness to the report, this wasn't what that report was there to do. It was to look at the safeguarding aspects of and as I say, there's just so many different lenses you can look at children's services through. Jane.
Yes, just perhaps the chair is absolutely right about that. There are different areas, but just to reassure you, that the focus on people with additional needs is strongly there, and how they move on. And we do have this rather unusual arrangement in Wiltshire where I do adult social care, SEND and inclusion, and share that responsibility with Laura. We have transitional safeguarding, but we also have a very strong growing up and moving on programme that we are developing, so that people don't get lost in that. You don't come to a cliff edge at 16 or 18 and then not have support. So just to mention that to reassure you, but it is yet another wonderful area we could explore.
Okay, and on that point, we're only running 20 minutes over time. So I'm going to draw a close on this item. I don't care a minute that we're 20 minutes over time. I think every single one of them has been worth it because it's been a really worthwhile report. And in fairness, we started 7 minutes late. So thank you again. Particular thanks to Professor Katie Birch, who's come down to present this to us today. We are really grateful and for the work that's been done. And I think actually I would like us, we normally just do everything by a nod of the head in this committee, but I think I want to send a message to our team of how grateful we are for all of the support and the work that they have done to get us from a point where we were unsatisfactory to a point where we've got a report here where the author has told us this is representative of an outstanding authority. So can you join me in congratulating our staff team? Can you pass that on? Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to say we'll take 5 minutes rather than 15, so top your drinks up fast if you want them, and then we'll race through the rest. Oh, apparently I've got to make a recommendation. Sorry, what am I meant to be recommending? Oh, yes, sorry, I'm in my head. Obviously, there are 5 recommendations in the report. They're going to come back to us in due course as an update report. Can we look at that within 6 months? Cool. Everyone happy? Great. Go and make a cup of coffee, folks. You want one? Yeah? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, folks, let us. So let us come back onto the agenda then, and we're on to item 7, Community Health Services. At its meeting on the 4th of July 2023, the Health Select Committee received an update on the progress of the Integrated Community-Based Services Programme, including an outline of the aim and purpose of this programme, the link to the ICP strategy, and key milestones and timelines. This information provided can be accessed on the Health Committee's meeting recording, Health Select Committee's meeting recording, and the written briefing is attached. We've not asked ICP officers to attend this meeting, but it is an opportunity for committee members to ask questions, and Lucy is going to very briefly tell us why she thinks we need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, so really for information, as John said, Health Select is the committee where these papers are going in. But essentially, across both children and adult community health services, the ICB, across the whole of BSW, so Baines, Swindon and Wiltshire, are commissioning new community health services. In Wiltshire, we've had an integrated service for children's community health. So HCRG are the provider, currently provide all community health services for children in Wiltshire, which includes a public health nursing element, which is the health visitors and school nurses. You'll know that a decision was made at Cabinet that the council is going to progress with commissioning the public health nursing element on our own. I won't replay the reasons for that, but what that does mean is that in terms of the health element, so the kind of more things like occupational therapists, physiotherapy, paediatricians, etc., that element, the ICB are looking at sort of pausing for a year whilst they then recommission those services. So the two won't be integrated going forward, but we're obviously working very closely with health. I'm on the programme board. You know, Kate in her role as DPH is having lots of conversations. So the outcome is not one that we necessarily wanted, because we do have an integrated service, but for reasons that I won't repeat, we are doing it separately, but with the expectation that the two providers work very closely together, whoever those two providers are in due course. So I just wanted to make sure that you were cited on that. And if anyone wants more information, obviously Health Select is the place. But we went out to tender just this week, I think, or last week, for the public health nursing element. And we can update you once we are clear on who the new provider is.
Sorry, thank you. Did anyone have a question? Can I suggest the way forward on this is that as and when things progress, a little bit like with the public nursing one, that the chair and I, sorry, the vice chair and I are included in, fraudulent slip there, are included in the briefings that the Health Select Committee get, and then we can bring it back to committee if we feel it. Is all happy with that? Yep, lovely. Okay, so item 8 is the Corporate Parenting Annual Report. So the annual report of the Corporate Parenting Panel was considered by our committee standing task group on Monday, the 26th of June, ahead of the annual report being finalised by the Corporate Parenting Panel on the 27th of June, and then will be presented to full council on the 18th of July. The findings of the Standing Task Group are being presented to the committee alongside the Corporate Parenting Panel's annual report, and both of them are in Agenda Supplement 2. My apologies that I was unable to attend on that Monday for the Standing Task Group, but I understand it was a really good, robust and detailed review by the Standing Task Group, and I'm glad to see that some of the suggestions have already been implemented by officers. So it's now for this committee to review the findings of the Standing Task Group and decide whether we endorse the recommendations. And it will then be for officers to offer a response to those recommendations when the finalised report is presented to full council on 18th of July. Because this is coming to us, we've already taken up a lot of officer time in the standing task group, talking to them in depth and robustly about this. We haven't invited officers again today because it's just eating into their too scarce. But the chair of the corporate parenting panel, Peter Hutton, is with us, and I know we'll be happy to answer any questions there may be. Peter, do you want to say anything as a brief introduction before we start?
Thank you, John. Yeah, just to say, Nettie Lee and myself attended the task group meeting that you referred to. Yes, it was very positive, very robust. A lot of the ideas and concerns have now been addressed by officers. I think one of the things moving forward is that around the data, and we keep saying that there's lots of data flying around in children's services because that's what it is. We're going to try and give a bit more narrative behind that. Performance data can be interpreted in various different ways, and I think there's been an agreement that a specific officer will talk to either the task group or indeed the whole committee. So you've got the wording beyond just the numbers. But just to thank everybody involved with the scrutiny of it. As you can see, it's a report very positive moving forward.
Did anybody have any questions or comments regarding the...
I've only got a very small amendment. We've got, it was a deliberate error to see if you'd read it. Page 47, paragraph E, we've got 38 out and 39 out of the county. And it should be one of those numbers is an in and one of them is an out. It's only but we should get it right.
I'm sure if you send it to Nettie, she will amend accordingly.
Yeah, no,
All right.
it was on the task group report. But
I think it's already been taken care of.
Yeah.
Jackie.
Yeah.
Okay. I only had one comment, Peter, which was the report and the changes to it. Thank you. When we spoke about the report last year, we talked about, I know that each member of the corporate parenting panel sort of takes on a responsibility. And we talked about having those members who take on those responsibilities coming along to CSC along with a relevant officer to really brief us on what work is going on there and what's behind it, to give us that little bit more than what the annual report does. Obviously, over the last year, that's not happened yet. And I'd be really keen if we could look to get that going, because I think it would be so informative for us as a committee.
Yeah, so very briefly, yes, absolutely. The reason it's not happened recently is that we've gone back to our young people to make sure that the strategic priorities are in line with their thoughts. It's pointless having strategic priorities of a panel that don't meet the expectations of our young people. So there's been work done with the Youth Voice team and the Youth Council and Children and Care Council. We've now got our strategic priorities, and yes, we will do exactly what you say, meet with you regularly to update you, and you can update us on your thoughts of the priorities.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. In which case, are we all happy to endorse the report of the Standing Task Group and therefore endorse the report of the Corporate Parenting Panel? Yep. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to Family and Children's Transformation Programme, their interim report. I managed to go back. Oh, I see. I've just, yeah. No, I've stopped that. I've got the paper here, haven't I? Oh, I got it. Sorry. Yes, so the committee has received a report on FACT at its meeting in October, and we requested a 6-month update, which is the attached report to review the data set that had been created and to see how the family help programme had been implemented. So we've got Jen Salter, and Simon Thomas, I think, who will be mainly talking to this one with us this morning to introduce the report. So Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So the report that you have in front of you is, as the Chair has suggested, is an update since we last came. The programme of work itself is a 2-year programme, so we are very much in the early stages still. And the period since the last visit and presentation to committee has been one of consultation activity, it's been one of development activity, and we have started to launch elements of the programme of work. So some elements are operational, whilst other elements remain to be launched. And primarily, the autumn period will see significant launch activity as laid out in the report. But in response to the questions asked at the last committee report that we attended, we have specifically in the report showed the development that we've done to date on the outcomes framework. There's also information regarding the stakeholder engagement, particularly with the local groups in the Warminster and Westbury pilot area, to hopefully clarify and reassure members that that work is robust. And also a sense, hopefully, in there as well around the rigour in terms of our evaluation and monitoring activity, which is being carried out in conjunction again with Oxford Brookes Institute of Public Care from the SAS item. So Katie is working with us again on our family help activity.
Nothing else? That's it?
I thought perhaps best to hand over to questions rather than...
Fine. Who wants to start us off with some questions? Joe.
Yeah, it's just it's a very simple question, really. I'm conscious that all the pilot activity that's taking place and getting going, and have no issue with that. But I am also conscious that this is helping to set the scene for the family hubs that take place from next April. And the reality is whether we will have had enough evidence and understanding of what has or hasn't worked with the pilot systems that take place in Westbury and Warminster, the pilot phase taking place, in order to really substantially inform that in a positive way?
Thank you. So the fact activity that's laid out in the report is fundamentally about the whole partnership. So it's very much all about the multi-agency approach to the delivery of early intervention and prevention. And family hubs are one part, a very important and very central part, but are one part of that. So the family hubs development is integrated absolutely within our family help strategy and will be rooted in terms of all the monitoring and evaluation that we do. So I think there is a sense of family hubs has a national framework, set of principles, set of objectives that will be delivered through that, but they do align absolutely with the wider family help strategy. So I think what we've actually got is a distinct advantage in terms of having done, albeit the early stages of our pilot work in Warminster and Westbury, but I would suggest enough to really be able to help us move forward in a way that if we were just in a family hubs sort of agenda and strategy, we would probably be at an earlier stage in development. And it's interesting, having spoken to Lucy-Anne, who came, it was the last select committee, wasn't it, to present on family hubs, that she was at a national family hub event earlier this week, and hearing from the family hub pilots who've received funding. And Lucy-Anne's view is actually we're further ahead in a lot of our activity and our thinking than even what the family hub pilots are. So some of them, for instance, are struggling with the concept of a digital and online offer. We've made really good progress with that. They're struggling with an outcomes framework. We're not there yet, but we're ahead of them. So it's reassuring, I think, to see that this early fact activity should really enable and facilitate that family hubs development to push through really quickly, but as importantly, I think, to be robust.
I just wanted to touch on the family hubs. Have the locations been identified yet, or have I missed somewhere that they've been identified?
So we had this item at the last select committee, so there is a paper in full that describes that, so perhaps we can just make sure that that comes to you again. Okay.
It might be more of a process question, but I noted that local area board reps are invited to network meetings and you have a mailing list of over 100 contacts. But I'm not aware that local members of Westbury and Warminster are included in any of that. And I just wondered if you know, that was an automatic thing that should happen, or if you know, we should be finding out, you know, through this meeting and really not have any prior knowledge. So just more of a process question.
Thank you. So we have delivered presentations to area boards in Warminster and in Westbury. And we are in constant contact with Liam and Graham as the local strategic partnership engagement managers. Our mailing list is wide, I think, you know, sort of over 100, but it's growing all the time. And we do always make the point of saying that if there's anybody who would wish to be added to either our invitation list or our circulation list in terms of our comms, then we'd be very happy to do that. I think the fact approach generally, regardless of what the project is one of inclusivity, and it's the more the merrier. So if we've missed in terms of anybody in from our comms and invite list, then we'd be very happy to invite people to various conversations and forums and so on. But we've been doing a lot of telling and selling and trying to engage, and we remain absolutely committed. So if there's people we're missing, then perhaps if we can just be informed, and then we can make sure we're broadening our list.
That's a little disappointing, because at the last time that FAC came to Children's Select, we had that very exact same discussion. I remember it clearly, and at that point the area board weren't even on the list, and we were promised that members would be included at every stage as it went forward. It really does worry me when Wiltshire Council launches all these wonderful initiatives and doesn't include its local members, who are the people on the ground in those wards and in those areas who are involved. So can we perhaps turn that round and have local members on the list by default? They can always say they don't want to be there, but I've never met a local member yet who complains about being told about Wiltshire Council doing work in their division. The ones I hear from are the ones who are complaining about Wiltshire Council not telling them about work they're doing in their division.
But absolutely. I mean, I can go back to the list and make sure that all local councillors are on those lists in terms of our communications. But as I say, we have been to the area boards, we have done presentations, we've had a lot of links with the local town council and done various presentations across the board. But you know, we can never do too much communication, and if we're not managing to close that down, then absolutely.
I just wanted to reassure, because I think the simple answer to the question is we did take on board what you said, and subsequent to that, Simon has gone to the 2 area boards and the others briefing-wise, and that this 100 should include everyone. We just want to check rather than they're not included. So I think that was more Simon saying, if you're hearing on the ground that perhaps people aren't included, we better check that, not that we haven't been doing that, just to be clear on that point.
Anyone else? My only question when I was looking at this was with regards to the data set, which is clearly in a very embryonic form as it stands here, because it doesn't really tell us how you will measure these things, just perhaps some things that you will be measuring. I was concerned to see education and things relating to education coming under wealth. For instance, elective home education. I don't think wealth is the only indicator as to whether somebody is choosing to home educate their children or not. And it concerns me that these sit within, and indeed even NEET. Wealth is a factor in these things, but it's not the sole factor in these things. There's plenty of middle class or upper class kids who are NEET, as well as those who come from perhaps less well-off backgrounds. So I just wonder whether that's appropriately termed.
So to clarify, the reason for those headings in terms of the themes is because in our strategy, which is fundamentally a strategy of social mobility, it's the primary link between education and that ability, you know, and how it influences one's opportunities later in life, which is hence the link to wealth in terms of a category. It's not, as you described, Chair, you know, kind of a judgmental approach. What we've tried to do is we've tried to be very strengths-based in our strategy, and we've tried to really focus the partnership on this long-term journey to social mobility rather than a short-term approach around simply sort of preventing escalation to high-cost late intervention services. So there's something in the terminology. I would hope that if you were to read or refresh on the strategy, that the health, wealth, well-being categories actually begin to make sense because they're explained there. What I haven't done here is set out the definition that we're using for health, wealth, and well-being. If it would be useful, we could circulate the strategy with the minutes for the meeting so that people would have the opportunity just to read through that and understand conceptually where it comes from.
Yes, but I also think that where you're putting these things in without any explanation towards them at all, then people will read them as they look. People won't read them bearing in mind that there's some other council documents somewhere that they've not seen for a long time or even seen at all.
No, that's absolutely understandable. I think it was it's probably the byproduct of going for brevity in a report where sometimes some of the nuance is lost. So absolutely take your point. Thank you. Okay.
Anyone else for anything else? Okay, in which case, oh, no, sorry, there was one other thing which we picked up when we, which is on paragraph 8 of page 48. Thinking of, certainly of our earlier item on the agenda today, how do the family hubs and workers link in with the locality teams within MASH? Especially as practitioners, you know, family help and early mental health are working directly with families. So any communication that will take place to avoid doubling up of service or families falling between the two, more importantly?
Okay, so our integrated front door, the service manager responsible line manages the pilot coordinator and therefore has a direct interface and is part of the steering group. So for exactly that reason, we make sure that the step down, which is essentially front door early support assessment and then potentially, you know, universal, is very clear and everyone is involved in that. So that's absolutely accounted for in terms of the setup and the structure of how we run the interface between our front door and the family help pilot.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Right, in which case I would suggest that we note this report, say thank you very much, and we will see you again later in the journey, no doubt. Jan?
I just wondered about time scale for that, 12 months. I just think we probably need to get a bit further ahead before we can come back with something a bit more detailed in terms of impact and next steps, whether you'd be happy or what.
When's it going live in family hubs?
April next year.
April next year. I think I would like to see it around the time it's going to be going live. So there's I mean, I don't know how the committee feel, whether we prefer to see it just before it goes live or just after it's gone live. My gut is before, because I think that it's that last opportunity, but Bridget's disagreeing and saying, go on, Bridget.
I'd prefer to see it after. I mean, I just think we won't have the family hubs. Why not? Let's see how it beds in about this time next year. So 3 months after the family hubs have been initiated locally. And just all have a bit more feedback.
I think, Chair, at the last committee, specifically for family hubs, you have agreed when you want it back. I can't remember off the top of my head. This is about the broader family help pilot. So I think that the two are slightly different. They obviously are linked, but one is the council's commissioned response, and then the family help pilot, I think, needs to come after that. So we were suggesting for the family help pilot 12 months, but you have already agreed. I just can't remember off the top of my head when. Is it October for the family hubs? So I think that's already been debated.
Okay, well, let's bring it back in 12 months then, and then we'll see where we go from there. Yep. Okay, so we move on to update on the building developments at Silverwood School, and we've got an attached report that provides an update on the building developments. Silverwood School, just to remind members, is a co-educational special school for children and young people aged 4 to 19 years. It was formed in September 2020 with campuses in Roud, Trowbridge and Chippenham, which meant the combination of the former schools of Roudford, Larkrise and St Nicholas. So we've got an update on this coming in, and we've got the Cabinet Member for SEND, Jane Davis, to kick us off, and then we'll follow on from there. So, Jane.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to do a few words of introduction before passing on to Kate Mullen, who's done some slides and will introduce the detail of the report. But I really wanted to share our absolute enthusiasm and commitment to this project. You know, as you all know, we've made a significant resource and financial investment in Silverwood and the System of Excellence. And therefore, it's important to engage you with ensuring that we've got the desired outcomes. I want to be very clear that the desired outcome isn't just the buildings. The real desired outcome is the education of children, the excellent education of children. And that's not just within these physical buildings that we are developing, you know, world-class facilities in, but in every school. You'll have noted that Laura Mays and Don Munns are at the Wiltshire Learning Alliance today. That's part of our outward engagement reach, so that we get peer-to-peer engagement in real inclusion. And we're all corporate parents sitting here, but I'd really like to ask you to be SEND and inclusion ambassadors too, because only through really focusing on this and developing it are we really going to advantage these young people. In reading the report, you'll have noticed that there are delays, and I'll just address those briefly in a minute. But I wanted to say that even out of the difficulties of delays, there have been some very positive outcomes. We have an officer now who works on school placements, and there's been a lot of engagement with other schools, mainstream schools. I just want to name check them: Longfield Centre, Belfield, Hardenhuish, Paxcroft schools. They've all offered temporary accommodation, and particularly Paxcroft, it makes my heart sing, because for many years, the Trowbridge site of Silverwood campus, very physically constrained, lots of mobiles on it, very little outdoor space. And now through this working with Paxcroft School, they've generously agreed to give us a 10-year lease on some outdoor space. So there'll be a forest school for those children who attend the Trowbridge campus. This is a real positive. They're also renting us a temporary classroom for a year whilst we make this transition. It's not out the back, somewhere quiet. It is in the heart of the school. This is a real positive. So I'd really like for you to look at the report through the lens of, are we actually doing what we want to do for the children, which is give them a fantastic education. Finally, you'll have seen, I've mentioned the delays. There is risk, and I hope all of your eyes pricked up when you read paragraph 25, which is around a risk that we haven't been able to fully control. We do have a full-time project manager on this, working alongside Wilmot Dixon, who are a very big specialist school building company. We have some more positive news on that, I'm glad to say, and I think Kate will update us on that. But I want you to know that the build is being closely managed, but I don't want you to focus entirely on that. I want you to look at the big picture, please. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Marie, for driving us through the slide deck this morning. So I'm really conscious of time. I know it's a really packed agenda, so I will try and stick to a kind of summary around the build developments at Silverwood this morning. So what I've prepared this morning is just a very short sort of series of slides that takes us through the developments that are detailed in the longer paper that was written by my colleague Melissa Hardwell. And then I thought there's actually nothing more interesting than seeing some pictures of the real live build at Roud. So there's some photographs to complete the slide deck so that you can actually see where we are with that. So rather unusually for me this morning, I'm talking to you about accommodation solutions only and not really talking about educational benefits and some of the broader picture that Jane has just alluded to. But I do understand that there's a presentation later on in the year to this committee about the wider educational benefits of the Silverwood School development and also the Wiltshire System of Excellence. So you'll have seen in the paper that we have experienced a growth in pupil numbers. No surprises there. The demand for specialist placements in Wiltshire and nationally is very high. We started off, as you'll have seen in the paper, with 340 planned places across the Silverwood estate. We're now looking to increase, or will be increasing, to 460 learners across the whole estate. So that's a significant growth in quite a short period of time. As Jane's alluded to and you'll have read, the new build at Roud is experiencing construction delays of 40 weeks, and that does have a financial impact that you'll have read. We do receive a £10,000 a week payment from the developer, Wilmot Dixon, in respect of delays, and that will be providing some financial contribution to the solutions that we've had to find to that build delay. We've put some transitional arrangements in place, which Jane's beautifully detailed, which enables our role, our number on roll to grow at Silverwood. And I think what's particularly interesting and what Jane has alluded to is sometimes we have to come up with solutions quite quickly to enable us to support the numbers that we have. And by doing that, we actually grow some other benefits, some unintended benefits. And we've seen some of that with the satellite provisions that we've had in place for a couple of years now for Silverwood. So Belfield has hosted for the last 2 years a satellite provision for us at their school. And I know that they would talk very positively about the learning that they have had from having Silverwood as part of their school site. And Silverwood would also talk about the benefits of having been co-located. But as Jane said, from September this year, we'll have satellite provision at Paxcroft, which kind of is co-located more or less with Silverwood Trowbridge campus. They're next door to each other, Longfield, Longmeadow and Harden Hewish. And we also are needing to make use of temporary mobiles on the Roud site as well to accommodate learners. So the delays to phase 3, which is the new build at Roud, have understandable implications on the delivery of the next phase, phase 4, which is around the redevelopment and additional works that are needed on the main house at Roud, and also phase 5, which is the retention and investment that we've decided we need to make in Chippenham and Trowbridge campuses to retain them as part of the Silverwood estate. As Jane's mentioned, though, that our overriding intention through all of this work is to make sure that the Silverwood leadership team and most importantly, the learners at Silverwood have the smoothest transitions that are possible whilst all of this work is going on around them and whilst there are some unavoidable delays. Can I have the next slide, please, Marie? So some of you will be very aware that we had a consultation earlier on this year around retaining and investing in the existing Chippenham and Trowbridge campuses. We did have some, through our process of consultation, some parental concerns in relation to that. Silverwood have worked very, very hard with their parent community and the wider community, and we've managed to, I think, support families where they have expressed concerns in relation to that. So the detailed building plans for phase 5 for the investment in Chippenham and Trowbridge are at an early stage. The consultation was only completed a few months ago. We're keen to achieve the same look and feel and standards across the estate. We recognise that when the Roud building is complete, it's going to have a real wow factor about it. We're not going to be able to completely recreate that wow factor at Chippenham and Trowbridge, but there are some works that need to take place to bring them up to the standard that we want them to be as we move forwards. And there is confidence at the present time that the new build at Roud will be delivered within the original contracted sum plus the contingency that's been allowed for that. And you'll see the figure there of the contingency as it currently stands. You'll also have noted in Melissa's report that there is a risk identified around some electrical works that were delayed. had a bit of an update this morning around that, and there is some progress in relation to that, with some cabling works that are progressing and moving forwards. But be reassured around that both Jane and myself, Anthony, who's the project manager, and Melissa will be monitoring that carefully over the summer to make sure that those continue to progress as we need them to. And if there's further communication that we need to make with the provider company, then we will do so. Can I have the next slide? Thanks, Marie. You're way ahead of me. So the growth in numbers, which I started this presentation with, continued with that ongoing work to the changing estate at Silverwood, means, as I've said, that we need to manage this process of change really, really carefully. The whole of the Silverwood genesis, if you like, has always been grounded very much in co-production work with young people, with families, and with the wider community. And we've continued to try and mirror that through all of the iterations of the Silverwood development. We want to make sure that any changes that are happening don't have a detrimental impact on the running of the school or families' experiences of being a parent of the school or young people's experiences. You'll note that I've added in there, and you may be aware that Silverwood was inspected last week, so it was its first Ofsted inspection, graded inspection, and I know you'll appreciate that that's an embargoed grading at this current time, but so I think it's reassuring probably for the school and the community to have been through that process. It's always a period of waiting with a new school, so the outcome of that will be shared when we're able to share that with you. So next slide, please, Marie. So if you've forgotten, because it's quite a long time ago since we were looking at these artist impressions of how Roud is going to look when it's complete, you'll see the image on the left is a slight aerial view of how the new build is going to be. And you'll remember, and I'm sure many, if not all of you, were part of those early conversations around how the design was kind of conceptualised, is that it is intended to very much sit in that really lovely landscape in Roud. And then the image on the right is the kind of view that you'll see as you approach the main school entrance. So can I have the next slide? So this is when this moves into, I'm sure you've all watched Grand Designs before. This is when you go from the artist impression to the reality of where we are at the moment. And obviously this image was taken from the time-lapse camera at the end of June. The building is kind of, which is sort of on the right of the image, is kind of shrouded in kind of plastic. There's probably a more technical term than plastic, but you'll see that that's kind of the situation that we're in at the moment. One of the real challenges and reasons for delay has been around the structure of the building. So as I said, it's designed to sit really beautifully within the landscape, also has quite a large flat roof structure. If Melissa was here, she'd be able to give you the statistic, but I think it's one of the largest flat roofs in Europe. So it's a really ambitious design, and the weather, which looks particularly awful on the day this image was taken, has not helped us in allowing timbers and other wood to dry out, so they haven't been able to progress on the roof design as quickly as we'd like. So that's probably not the best image that we'd want to be looking at in terms of where the campus is. Just wanted to show a couple of images from a ceremony earlier this year, the topping out ceremony, which was attended by learners and by Jane as well. And unfortunately, the weather didn't allow them to be able to climb onto the roof as was intended, but it did allow some learners from Silverwood and other stakeholders to see the progression internally and for young people to start to see the learning spaces that they're going to be using. So next slide, please, Marie. And there's Sean and Jane there in their high-vis and hard hats. And next picture, please, Marie. So I thought it might be helpful, again, if you've watched Grand Designs, you'll know that sometimes the exterior looks kind of very much in development, but you can see progress on the interior, and that is true of Silverwood as well. So this is one of the interior learning spaces in its current situation. So you can see, in some ways, the interior feels much further progressed than that exterior shot would suggest. So have the next slide, please, Marie. I've just got a series now of interior shots that Anthony's provided. This is another interior shot. And next one, please. That's a same view of the exterior. I don't know whether it's the blue skies that really help. That image just looks so much better than the first one, but that's an exterior shot of how it's looking at the moment, and a further exterior shot. And certainly that image certainly presents the building in a looking further progressed than that first one. Next one, please. It's another interior kind of corridor working space shot. You can just keep going, Marie. That's great. And just if you're interested and you haven't had a chance to look, there is a live time-lapse camera that's on Silverwood's website, so you can actually see a time-lapse footage of them breaking ground to getting to this particular point and then onwards to completion. So that was all I had to update from that report, Chair, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much. So, questions, Mike and then Carol. And then Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I was on site at Roud myself last week, and I was talking to one of the builders, and they mentioned, you mentioned in your presentation about the timber getting wet earlier in the year and drying it out. And the builder sort of laughed and said, oh, this is going to cost Wiltshire Council thousands and thousands of pounds for the materials that have been damaged. I mean, I'd really like to think that the contractor not taking care and protecting materials from the weather wouldn't actually cost Wiltshire Council anything at all. Could you clarify that, please?
You go ahead.
Yeah, that is a conversation I've had with our project manager, and yes, liability sits with Wilmot Dixon. But also, I think we need to be very clear that this isn't a consequence of neglect or poor management. It is something that has happened, and building projects do inevitably have different issues, and we had an extremely wet winter. And the tolerances are very, very minute. They are constantly testing the percentage of moisture in the drying out timbers, because what they won't do is they won't seal the roof until the tolerances are properly met, because that would cause ongoing issues. It's not that it's sitting there rotting away, being neglected. That's absolutely not true. It's about the very specific tolerances that can allow for the roof to go on, because what they won't do is build something that in 5 years' time is going to have issues because the tolerances weren't met.
I've just got this mental image now of Jeremy Clarkson measuring how wet his barley is before he can plough it or whatever it is. But it's exactly the same thing you're saying, which is that they've got to, yeah. Is that okay, Mike?
Well, I'd still like to ask the question, are Wiltshire Council going to be bearing that cost for those materials, or will it be Wilmot Dixon?
Sorry, I apologise. I thought I'd said that. I have spoken to Anthony Dixon about it, who's no relation to Wilmot Dixon, by the way. He is our internal project manager, very skilled professional with lots of experience. No, the responsibility and the financial liability sits with Wilmot Dixon for that. And, you know, for delays, we do have this well crafted contract we have with them.
Carol.
Oh, wrong one. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation and the comments from you both, and especially you, Councillor Davis, about your comments about the emphasis on the children's education rather than buildings. That's very reassuring. And you've probably partly answered the question about the wood, but I was just, you know, I read with horror about the 40-week delay plus, you know, the finance involved. But I just wondered if the 40-week delay was mainly down to SSE, but it seems like it might be a combination of both.
Yes, you're right. The 40-week delay the SSE piece is a risk that we're managing, but the delay has been predominantly down to weather issues. It's either too dry, too wet, too hot. You know, as we all experience, if you've had any building work done yourself, the wet weather has not helped us in terms of the wet weather never helps with buildings, but when you're building a large timber-based structure, wet weather is the last thing that you need, and that's really what has led to the significant delay here.
Joe.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the report. I've got probably a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. So the first comment is the collaboration between Paxcroft and Silverwood is just, I would say an example actually of how brilliant Trowbridge schools work closely together. But I know, I mean, basically they're on the same site, but I think the mutual benefits there are really, really important, and can really see, again, as you say, almost unintended consequences, but actually I think really make a difference. The same with Belfield, having had people, I think really has made an impact. I think paragraph 12, I could say it, paragraph 12. I'm really pleased to see the commitment there that when Trowbridge students move as they become secondary pupils and transfer, that there is still a commitment that life skills and things will take place within their community. I know that was a concern of some of the parents, and I think are really positive to see that commitment to that. So my questions come to really what we've been talking about. With the delay, I'm conscious your programme team, will be doing everything they can to lessen the negative impact to the students, staff, everyone involved. That will be difficult. But because they are kind of scattered and it is quite delayed, are you having to employ additional people to provide that support that possibly hadn't been expected? I'll ask the two questions at once because then you can. So that's my first one: is are we having to provide additional support, and if we aren't, should we be, to just make sure that that helps with that longer transition? And then the other things with the delays then to the Trowbridge and the Chippenham, so stage 5, which currently costs around 3.6, have we built in that additional another year on? Costs rising as to what we would expect that might be and whether that's built into the contingency.
Really good questions, thank you. I think the first one, I can reassure you that, as you'd expect, and that we work very closely with Silverwood. We've known that there's been an initial delay kind of on the table for some time with the new build. So we've been working on arrangements for September 23 with Silverwood for some time. We've tried, as you'd expect, wherever possible, to keep a kind of standstill model for learners so that they're not having to make multiple transitions, because we recognise the impact that has on learners, but also from a kind of operational perspective, that's really difficult for Silverwood School to manage. So where we have needed to put on or make available additional learning spaces or additional classes in terms of numbers of learners, we would always work with Silverwood around costing that in terms of what they need for staff and would support with that. In terms of the numbers of learners, I suppose, without wanting to simplify something that's really complicated, it has been a bit of a jigsaw puzzle for us collectively to think about the number of learners is this number, whether they're situated, if route had been complete, it's where they are really. So how do we kind of make sure, as you say, we've got the right people in the right place to support learners? And Silverwood have worked really closely with us on that, and that's enabled where there are transitions for learners site to site, that has been well planned and well managed for those young people. Obviously, what's been key to this as well is communication with families. I mean, our families, as you'd expect, are not terribly surprised to know there's a delay to the build. There's a kind of inevitability around that. But what they have really welcomed is that ongoing communication from Silverwood about where your child is going to be from September. You get the big picture, but what is this actually going to mean for me and my family? And also, we've been working very closely with our transport team, because as you'll appreciate as well, there's transport implications of young people not being where we anticipated them being and maybe being on a different site. So where Silverwood have needed our support in order to work with them to meet our children's needs from September, we have worked with them and supported the whole way. The second question around the kind of additional growing costs for the works to Chippenham and Trowbridge, Melissa would be far better placed to answer that question than I am. So I will take that back and get a written response for you in relation to that. But I think there is an acute awareness and understanding that delays cost money, whatever delay you're talking about, and even when we're talking about much smaller piece of work such as that to the Chippenham and Trowbridge site. So I'll come back to you on that particular point.
I was just going to add on the second question that, we're hugely committed in this SEND space at the moment. We have free school bids, we have SAIL, which I absolutely love the name of, Salisbury Academy for Inspirational Learning, opening. We have Melksham House coming online, we are looking constantly. It's an area where we're expanding, and whilst I can't predetermine a question that may or that may come up or may not come up, the political and officer commitment to this is significant. So personally, I would feel optimistic that if more money is required, there would be a way found. Well, I hope I was sufficiently cautious about it, so we can't predetermine an answer to a question. So,
Anybody else got anything? Trevor?
So just staying with this thought, it might have been helpful to have had the explanation that we've heard today in the report. Actually, it was simply stated rather baldly without any explanation of why. It still seems incredible. A bit of wet weather, 40 weeks delay. Is there anything else causing any further problems? Is that the only thing? Next winter will be wet. If it's not wet, it'll be cold. Will that cause more problems?
I can't comment on whether it's the only problem, but that's certainly the information we've been talking to the contractors around, is around the weather and it's the weather plus the predominantly timber build of the structure that has delayed the build. There also were earlier delays around kind of procurement of particular building materials, which again, so we had delay in getting the materials on site, and then the weather kind of has had a knock-on delay. So we haven't gone from a 0 delay to a 40-week delay. We've started off knowing that the project was going to be delayed because of delays with materials, and then it's become further delayed because of the weather. But yeah, I mean, it's disappointing, and I wouldn't want to paint it in any other way. That we would much rather that everything had moved according to timetable and young people were going to be in that new build from September 23. But as soon as we knew that there were going to be delays, I suppose from an officer perspective, our main priority has been around mitigation and making sure that we had sufficient school places for those children and young people.
Just briefly to answer Trevor's question, the main subcontractor also went bust a few weeks ago, which can't have helped the situation, but I think they have been replaced now.
Oh, what joys there are in the building industry, hey? Anybody else I do have a couple of questions. Thank you, Jane, for your introduction to this, and you're absolutely right. The education of our young people must always be the primary factor in our minds, but we must also look at the projects that we're undertaking, and we must look how we spend the limited money that we have available on those. And across paragraphs 24 and 25, there's a couple of bits that don't quite add up for me, so I'm hoping you can help me. First of all, earlier on you said that it was a very carefully crafted contract, particularly with relation to the money we could be claiming from Wilmot Dixon for the delays, and that they have responsibility for it. But the funding we get back from them doesn't actually cover the costs of having to mitigate them not meeting their obligations, does it?
No, there is a shortfall in that.
Yeah.
But, along with other things, and I don't know the contractual details of the Sale Academy, for example, but that's also been delayed. As you know, post-COVID, it's been a very difficult time for the building construction industry to get, appropriately trained people as well as materials. So these are costs which are unfortunate, but,
I'm just wondering, the question I'm asking there is why, if we're putting clauses in the contract to recoup costs in the event of the contractor not fulfilling their side of the deal, why we're not putting in costs that actually would meet the costs that we will face, as opposed to whatever costs it is that are in there.
Well, I think the answer to that, and obviously we'd have to refer to Anthony Dixon and the legal team, but I think the costs of mobile classrooms, etc., has gone up exponentially recently as well in an unexpected way. I can see Kate nodding, so perhaps I'll pass that to her.
Yeah, that's a really good example to raise. I mean, the contract predates my involvement with the piece of work, but I'm making an assumption, and I think it's a fair assumption to make, that at the time that was calculated, that was felt to be sufficient. The cost of mobile classrooms has risen there's two issues really. One is the cost of the mobile classrooms. The second is being able to source them. Now, we hear that about lots of things, don't we? So the cost of being able to find them and supply them has more than doubled. So probably what felt appropriate at the time is no longer appropriate because of other escalating costs. I don't think anybody would envisage, for example, the cost of mobile classrooms growing as it has. And when builds are delayed, that is your first kind of means of finding space for children and young people until builds are completed. So I can only assume that it was felt to be sufficient at the time of putting that together.
Right, okay. So making that assumption then, I then look at 25, where we're talking about how potentially, and I get it as potentially, the contractor could then be asking us to pay back. I assume we were expecting an earlier installation date from SSE.
Yes, we were expecting an earlier installation date. And as I say, we've had an update today that the kind of unit that we need, you can tell this isn't my area of knowledge, the unit that we need has now been delivered to SSE, and there will be arrangements made for SSE to deliver that and install that on site. So there is progress, but you're absolutely right. That was envisaged to have been delivered much earlier than now.
So when should SSE have installed that?
I'm not absolutely sure. I mean, I can find out the date for you because it will be in our agreement that we had as part of the build.
Because what I don't understand is why, if SSE are failing to meet their contractual obligations and have already substantially missed their contract, and if the project is 40 weeks behind progress and we're rapidly approaching the point where this would be a challenge, then they must be not far off 40 weeks behind from SSE. What I don't understand is why we would have financial implications to that in paying compensation for the delay, rather than SSE, who were contracted with an installation date.
I couldn't agree more that it feels like a concerning and confusing situation for us to be in. I can't comment on why, but I would need to go back and talk to our legal advisors who will have advised on that.
Can we get a written answer on that? Because
that's fine.
it concerns me
Yeah, of course.
greatly that we could end up with a gun being held to our head for something that's got nothing to do with us. And if we're potentially going to be paying someone else damages because somebody else has let us down, then that's not so craftily crafted. And yeah, so if we could get an answer on that, I'd appreciate it. Jackie, is it really quick?
Yeah, your point that you said about the contracts and things, it would be useful if we could get from the legal department as to what builders are prepared to sign up to their responsibilities. Because I think some of the things that you were mentioning, some of them would turn around and say, we're not going to do that. But we would need to know that if that was something that we asked and whether it was possible to
But what they
achieve
would
those.
do now is different to what they did when they signed the contract.
Well,
It's
yes,
the contracts that have been signed.
But the trouble is,
that
they
we're
just
interested in.
they end up going bust, and then we're no better off. So
Okay, anyone for anything else? In which case, thank you very much indeed, and good luck with trying to, I hope it doesn't get to the point where we've all got to go out with shovels and join in.
I think the issue would be sourcing a substation, which is what the delay with SSE is. In common with many other things, they haven't been able to get their hands on a substation, but it has now arrived, which is very good news.
Yes, yes, if it exists, then that's an awful lot better than it doesn't exist.
Yes.
So, okay, so we move on, or if we've got a, well, we don't need to worry so much about a briefing on the SSE situation, do we? Because we, perhaps as a way forward on this one, we get a briefing to the chair and vice chair early next year, looking to update on the plan move to the railed classrooms from April 24. And then we can consider whether we need to bring something back to the whole committee or whether things are now ticking along such that we don't need to panic. And if we do need to bring it back to the whole committee, that will probably be looking for the meeting on the 12th of March. Okay, we have the lovely Jo who has joined us, and is going to be talking to us about the attached Child, Youth and Family Voice Team annual report, covering work for the past year with the future plans for families and children's services, the Children in Care Council and the Wiltshire Youth Council. So I'll hand over you to Joe to introduce your report.
Thank you very much. Wait for it to appear on screen. Perfect. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm Joe from the Child and Youth Voice Team. We'll just get straight into it because I know I'm the last, I think. So I'll just try and be as quickly as possible. So we run the Children in Care Council. We have been doing that since April 2021. Lots of progress has been made in this space. The recruitment's gone up, as you can see. Last year, 48 children in care attended the Children in Care Council. Last year was mainly about building relationships, building connections, them finding a sense of community. And we did lots of great activities, which some people in the room even attended: horse riding, PGL, residential trips, water sports. Loads and loads of great feedback from the children that attended those sessions. This year, going forwards, we're looking at, okay, with the voice team, how are we going to make sure that the voices of children and young people have shape and influence services? So we're looking at creating a new podcast, and the first podcast has been recorded and hopefully will be sent out soon, if it not already has been sent out to all councillors for that. And we'll be having guests coming along to the podcast sessions, speaking to young people. We've already had the virtual school. We're going to be having the IROs, the CP chairs, and various other people, hopefully some members too, to speak to those young people on the Children in Care Council committee, which is a new group of around 9 young people, a much smaller group that are very interested in the voice activities. Last year it was we had a mixture of people wanting to come for voice and people wanting to come for activities. Next year it's going to be more around the voice, and then having activities on top of those voice sessions as well. So a really successful year in terms of Children in Care Council, and you had the lovely Cora come and speak at the full council, and I know that went down really, really well. Next slide, please. So Mind of My Own is an app that's commissioned. We use it to get the views of children and young people, the wider cohort of children and young people around their individual cases. So they, in the last year, 180 young people signed up to use the app. 716 statements were sent, one-app statements, and 259 express statements were sent. So overall, just under 1,000. The app was used 1,000 times for children and young people to share their views with their workers around their lives, really. And it's been really impactful. We had a use of the app that's led to safeguarding concerns. So another way for children and young people to raise the fact that they're not feeling safe or they're not feeling supported. The app really helped with that, and been able to help us get support in quicker and help evidence their views in their care planning. As I say, it's quite a lengthy report, so that if you want more details about that, then that's in there. Next slide, please. The Young Persons Fostering Consultation Panel. So overall, we've had 11 of these, and these are for children and young people to interview, essentially, foster carer applicants and provide a two-way discussion with those applicants about why they want to become foster carers, their strengths, weaknesses, suitabilities, and provide them with some, some lived experience for them to go away and think about how they might want to improve, or what they're doing well, and that's got really great feedback at the corporate parenting panel from Jay Williams around how that's being used with the main panel. So it's not just tokenistic; it's actually it actually has influence over the whether those people are recruited as foster carers or not. Next slide. So some of the future work that we're doing in terms of family and children's. We are recruiting voice ambassadors. So voice ambassadors will be paid sessional employees. We already got that money in the budget from an open role. And they will be able to use their lived experience to help deliver training, provide feedback, assist in recruitment, and potentially do some peer parental advocacy as well with family members that are just coming into children and family services. And again, this goes back to, not just speaking to children, young people, families. This is real life built into services rather than bolted on co-production work at its finest. Next slide, please. The Bright Spot survey is a national survey which lots of local authorities take part in. They use the same questions on every survey, and this year we'll be doing it with Wiltshire young people, Wiltshire children in care and care leavers. This survey will be able to help us really understand the needs of the wider cohort of children in care, not just those that attend our group, but hoping, most, if not all, children in care in Wiltshire, and then being able to really pinpoint those areas that we need to develop on going forward and compare ourselves to other areas around the country as well. Next slide. We're also this year launching a family voice service. Funny enough, we're doing interviews today for a family voice worker. And the family voice service will be doing similar work than what we're doing with our children and young people, but actually the families that interact with children's social care as well, getting their feedback, looking at the barriers, looking at why, what's important to them, and really using that co-production approach to improve services and make sure that we're really working with families rather than just doing it to them. So that's a really exciting piece of work that I'm looking forward to doing. And the Youth Council has had so many successes over the last year. We had the first Youth Pride event in Salisbury. We've also the Youth Councillors also do audits of schools, go in and speak to young people and then provide feedback to head teachers. There was an Eco Week where we raised awareness about environmental issues within schools, and it was a competition. And then we're doing a debate competition between schools to really build on those skills for young people, to give them the skills that they need going forward in their roles as to share their views. Any questions?
Anybody got any questions for Joe? Joe?
Thank you. It's just a couple of quick ones. Hello again, Joe. You're probably sick to death of the sight of me. Firstly, I would just say that I was invited by Joe and the young people to join the Youth Council last week as part of the task group looking at area board and spend investment in youth activity. Again, very impressed with the how articulate the young people, etc., that were involved in that. I am conscious in the plan that you do mention it, and I just wonder whether the team have enough resources needed to support the Youth Council and the activity that does. And actually, I'm sorry, I should have started. Firstly, thank you very much for the report, which just shows the amazing amount of work that you are doing. That is hugely important in making a difference. That's the first thing. So the one is the parents, the resources with regards to Youth Council. And then another question, I'm conscious that with the Care Experience Parent Group, it's very recently moved to the Studley Children's Centre as a more appropriate thing. That won't be a children's centre come the beginning of next year. So we'll have to look at relocating. That's actually just more a point to make sure that doesn't get lost in the ether somewhere. But yeah, so the first one is, have you got resources?
Yeah, thank you for that. So your first point around the resources, we do have conversations about that. My manager, Sarah James, has just left, and we're waiting for her replacement to come in, and then we've got down the line in the plan for Jen, myself, and the new person coming into post to kind of look at that and look at how that the strategy for the Youth Council going forward. And yeah, in Studley Green, yeah, I'm sure we'll hopefully find somewhere else just as good. Thank you.
Jackie?
Just quickly, are you happy about the numbers of young people that participate in the sessions? I know you mentioned about the app, you had quite a large number of engagements on the app, as to obviously 48 children that are involved in your sessions.
So to put that into context, that's a very high number of children in care engaging with children in care councils. I think the other local authorities that I've worked with, you know, you're talking 5-6 people. You know, it's quite hard to engage that cohort of young people due to the nature of, you know, when we're talking about things like meetings and you have children in care, you know, that's a huge red flag for them. Oh, no, you know, don't want to do a meeting, don't want. And we've done a lot of work in terms of building those connections, going away on trips, putting activities on, so they feel comfortable around each other, so they can then share their views. So yeah, I'm very happy with that 48 number. I can't remember what the cohort size is, but I think it's over 10% of children in care, which is, again, quite impressive.
Thank you. I'll echo 10%, well over 10% is very impressive of any cohort of young people, let alone children in care. So, Joe, Youth Council. I was really excited when we elected our Youth Council because I thought this was such a positive, wonderful thing. And then I've never really heard anything of it again. What's happening with it?
Good question. So the youth councillors have had very specific things that they've wanted to do in their roles. And ultimately, it's been mainly focused on officers going to those meetings and attending those sessions. So we have a monthly youth council session, and they provide their sort of knowledge and experience with officers. So we've had public health come in, we've had communities come in, we've had people from all across the council come and use and speak to the youth council. You know, I recognise that we launched the Shadow Youth Cabinet, which ultimately, you know, being the first year of something, probably didn't get the how much that would take in terms of chasing young people, trying to get them linked in with members, arranging meetings, and then you've got GCSEs and other commitments as well. So, you know, that it was a learning experience, and obviously next time we have those elections, we'll be able to plan a lot more from the learning that we've had this time. So from what I'm hearing from yourself, Chair, is that you'd like more interaction with the Youth Council.
Well, I've long bemoaned the fact that this is the Children's Select Committee, and for about 6 years now, we haven't had a youth representative. We used to have a young person's representative on the committee. I was kind of assured that the concept of the Youth Council and someone coming through that was going to help fulfill that. Because my biggest worry is that it's all well and good. You've got, what, 15 members of this committee, all committed to young people. But with the possible exception of Catherine there, none of us are young people. Go on.
I just wanted to say, I noticed in the report it said about the Pride event in Salisbury and the EcoFest, but are they just operating in Salisbury, or are they working in other areas like Chippenham, Trowbridge? I just want
Yeah,
to know
so
a bit more about
we've had to be quite creative with resources. So we don't have the resources in the team to put on our own youth pride. So we looked to partner with Salisbury Pride, and as part of Salisbury Pride, we had the youth element of that.
Because Chippenham recently had a Pride event, and it would be good to see younger people coming to that, because I don't know the numbers of how many young people actually did come to that. So it'd be good to engage with that, because there will be one happening next year around the same time. I think it was June.
I just wanted to say, and Joe mentioned it at the meeting that we're going to have, but I think there is a point at which we need to look at what the team is doing, because of course this team was set up specifically in the beginning to work with our children in care, and specifically the cohort working with children's social care. And what's happened, which is wonderful, and clearly people are wanting it and it's having benefits, is we're reaching a much broader group of young people, and the team was never set out to do that and isn't resourced to do that. And I think we need to think, you know, as a council, how we can manage that, and how it links with wider council initiatives around including youth voice, etc. So it's kind of, we're just going to sit down and really look at that and have some conversations with Lucy and CLT initially about actually what is our strategy around this team, because we're reaching into a lot of different areas and we want to do something really well, and the team should be focused really on the children that are open to children's social care was a starting point. And if we're going to do more, then we need to think about how we're going to resource it.
You've got a really good point, Catherine, because we had Melksham Pride. And it would be really lovely if, and this isn't a criticism, Joe, it's an aspiration, not a criticism, but it would be really lovely if our central coordinators were able to be supporting young people, or supporting the community in every community to be supporting their young people to being able to participate more and all the rest of it. So I think there is learning absolutely there to do. I think to watch this space on this area is the fact that it might even be this week that the government publishes its revised statutory guidance on the responsibilities of local authorities on working with young people, which doesn't introduce any new legislation, but is going to make much, much clearer what the expectations of local authorities are in terms of what they should be providing for young people and what a youth service within a council should look like. And I think that for a lot of councils, that's going to be an unpleasant reminder of what the statutory duties under the Children's Act are, although the government's going to give 3 years for people to get back to where they should be. I think that the government has already said there will be no new resource to go alongside the new statutory guidelines. So it'll be very interesting to see how these things are met. But to finish the question I was asking, Joe, which is with regards to the Youth Council, and we can take this one away, this doesn't have to be answered now, but it's how can we sync the work of this committee with the work that is being done with young people's voice, because it would be wonderful to hear one way or other young people's voice through this committee. And I use the word through deliberately because it doesn't mean young people have to be at. And there's no reason at all why we shouldn't have to go to young people as much as us young people to come to us. So if it's that the chair and vice chair have to go along to a children and care meeting or a youth council meeting and listen to the young people there, I know Jackie's as willing to do that as I am. For us to be able to get that voice of young people. But we shouldn't be a children's select committee and not have any representation of children. directly or indirectly at it.
I think it's a brilliant idea, and actually to have that governance for the youth council in particular would be welcomed.
I've got everyone because I got Mark, but I had Caroline before Mark. So if I can go to Caroline, then I'll come to you, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, the Pride event last year was brilliant. Sadly, we've got no funding to do one in Salisbury this year. And the only outreach that the LGBT community has from a youth perspective is that City Council has just started, in partnership with Salisbury Pride, a youth club, which is once a month on a Thursday. So that was quite hard to set up. But obviously, the more we can get integrations, because obviously the Wiltshire Council doesn't have enough money to put it on themselves, you need to work in partnership and you need better sort of interactions and get the community on board. But well done, and well done, Joe.
I think we're also all looking forward to the outcome of the report from the, sorry, stop this from the outcome of the task group that have been looking at youth work, because I think that their report will be, Joe's disappeared for a second, but will be very, very informative when we come to that. Mark.
Yeah, following on to a point you made earlier, I was with Joe coming to that meeting, really informative. Some great answers we got from the young people as well. Some quite surprising, actually, like the anxiety one that I pointed out. You know, we asked why young people weren't interested in, or not interested, but didn't go to attend events that were on, and anxiety came quite top. But my question is, how are you finding, because there wasn't that many young people there, I think it was 9. How many are on the youth council, and how are you finding over the years? Attendance dropped off, but do people lose interest and just don't bother anymore? How are we keeping them engaged?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. With the youth council, we started with every bar 2 secondary school having 2 people. Now, people have moved school, people have moved out of area. You know, there's always going to be natural decline with any project. I think generally the numbers are around, you know, kind of between 10 and 15 at those meetings. I think, again, going forward, the resource would be to call schools, to remind them, to be able to have that more kind of interaction. We send out minutes, we call people, we've got WhatsApp groups, etc. People do lose interest, but I think next time getting the schools on board more, you know, and making sure that the schools, you know, if people haven't, you know, turned up within the 3 times and, you know, another election happens or something like that. But again, that takes quite a lot of admin time and support. So we will kind of go away, we'll reflect on how the first term's gone, and then look at those learning opportunities moving forward for next time.
Wonderful. Okay. I think I will draw that to a conclusion at that point then, just looking at the time and seeing where we are. But, I mean, can I just say that in terms of young people's voice, I think that despite the restrictions you're working under, we have made a giant leap forward from where we were a few years ago. So thank you, Joe. Thank you to Cameron. And we look forward to see next year's report, which I'm sure will be even more exciting and full of stuff than this year's. But in the meantime, don't be a stranger. Okay, we're going to come on to our regular updates. With the committee's permission, I'm going to whiz through these a little bit because I am very mindful of time. School Ofsted judgments. We've got an updated report there on page 85. There's not a lot of movement since last time anyway, because we only met, 4 or 5 weeks ago. So are you happy that I don't think we've got anyone speaking to those today anyway, have we? So you're happy we note those? Department for Education changes. As ever, sincere thanks to the officers who prepare this. It really is helpful. Did anyone have any specific questions coming from this they wanted to ask? Got away easy there, Lucy. The working together to improve school attendance. initiative. I don't know, is there anything anybody has to say? Right, so in your agenda packs is the information that we've been asking for on non-attendance. So I'm sure everybody has gone through those and seen that. Joe?
Yeah, sorry, I've just got a quick question. On the attendance figures, I just want to check, I'm going to presume that EBSA is in there, the emotional-based score avoidance would come under the illness percentage.
Can you repeat the question, Joe, because I didn't quite
So,
catch it.
so under the attendance figures, it will show reasons for absence. So illness obviously comes up as a big part of that. I'm just checking whether emotional-based school avoidance would come under illness, which I'm kind of presuming is yes, but I'm making an assumption.
Yes, it would. Well, it wouldn't capture all young people that are presenting with EBSA, but it will capture those where there has been that conversational piece of work around a young person being too anxious to attend school and that being deemed to be a medical need. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say, obviously, nationally, there's we're all kind of looking at secondary absence figures and going, will they ever actually improve? Also, I'll be, not now, because obviously at the time, be interesting if we get more of a feel of whether absence is also impacted by the higher percentage of parents working from home. So previously, little Johnny being sick, got to go to work, go to school, you'd be fine. But now when you're sat in an office and working from home, actually, little Johnny can sit on the sofa and not be very well. So, you know, those are kind of conversations that schools are having, I think, sometimes with parents about whether they send children in.
Well, I haven't got the answer to that, but yes, it's a very good point. But just to say, and just to reinforce that we've got DfE attendance advisor come in all day Friday for the deep dive, so we'll have some more kind of feedback. We have already met with her, but you know, it'll be interesting to see what she brings from a more national perspective.
It would be interesting to raise that question of Joe's, because I hadn't really thought of it until you said. It's a really interesting point, which is that it's easier for work-at-home parents now to let a child remain home than sort of push them to school.
But I think that could be wrong. Be interesting to see what the attendance advisor says. But I think when you've got the Children's Commissioner, you've got the Schools Minister all going, secondaries at 91%, we're not really sure whether at what point that might start to rise because of so many different things. I think it's kind of working out what all those percentages might be.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you're getting that feedback from the schools that you're linked in with. So if they're seeing that because they know what parents' jobs are, then that's is an interesting one. Yeah.
So we've got an update on the schools forum work going on there. Good luck if anybody wants to ask a question on any of that. No, good. Corporate parenting update. Well, we took the report earlier, didn't we? So I don't think we need to.
I've just got one thing to update. It was just a thank you to Councillor Trigg and Councillor King, who attended the recent visits to Cannon's House. As we said before, and you alluded to earlier, Chairman, we haven't got councillors doing Reg 44s now, but we have the informal invitation from the manager at Cannon's House. They're working well, and there will be more. Thank you for attending. Hope it was worthwhile.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Directors' updates. Anything specific that you want to bring to us, Lucy?
Yeah, we probably said enough. But, you know, we've obviously said we're anticipating an Ofsted inspection. We know that there is a pause in December. So if the phone doesn't ring Monday morning, then we won't get anything until, what did I just say? December. Did I say December?
You did say December.
Very strange. My brain's doing weird things. August. Then it will be September.
But
Well, not it will be September. From September, it could be.
Yeah.
And same with Send.
Anything, Jen?
Nothing to add.
I've just got, anyone got any questions for directors?
Sorry, John, and
What we're here for.
it's not a question, but it is something that I'd like recorded and fed back. And I'm not going to go into the detail, but I am a governor at Studley Green School. The support that Lucy's team through Helene has given to Studley Green that's had a very difficult 2 or 3 weeks for various reasons. The support that they have had and from the educational psychologist has been exemplary. So I'd just like, again, that pass back and just, you know, it makes such a difference knowing that that's there.
Make sure that hits the minutes, please. Because I think it is important where we are good, we remember it.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Joe. And obviously that's Kate's team, so she can pass that directly back. Just to, I don't know how I forgot this either. We had the LGA peer review really recently on
Yep.
SEND, so we're awaiting the final report. And once we've got that and we kind of progress the action plan, we'll happily share some of that with the committee.
And the one thing I had was, I had the pleasure of meeting somebody who worked for the music service recently. Now, you may remember I was incredibly sceptical when you set up the new music service. You don't remember, which is a pleasant surprise. But actually, he was saying how wonderful it was, a pleasure to work for, and they were doing great things. But one concern he did express was apparently they're looking at regionalising this now. So rather than having a Wiltshire music service, it would be a regionalised one. And he was really worried that Wiltshire was going to get dragged down because he's done work in other neighbouring authorities that haven't had a service at the level that ours is and doesn't provide what ours does, and was worried about us losing rather than gaining. Can I ask you perhaps to take that one away and look at and come back with? Because he was very positive about us, but very concerned about the future. Well, we've only got one portfolio holder left. Well, we only ever had one, I think. Anything, Peter?
Just to say, in my particular area, there's a lot of work being done on youth justice. I know there's been lots of issues around antisocial behaviour, around devices, trowbridge, etc. There's a lot of work going on currently. I'm now part of the membership of the new youth justice organisation. So, yes, we are aware. Yes, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes.
Lovely, thank you very much. So, Chair's update. Update on fuel. You remember I asked about fuel last time round. I have had a briefing. The good news is it's going ahead. They've found a new company to do it. It's not quite what it was last year. It's not as big as it was last year. Definitely reduced numbers, but it's something. And I suppose under the circumstances, something is better than nothing. But I think there's some work to do with how we do it in the future, and perhaps some risk assessment work to do with how we do it. All the eggs in one basket seem to have quite a big impact. But actually, thank you to officers for getting something out of the ashes of that. I earlier on said about Wiltshire being featured at the LGA conference, and congratulations to Nettie for her presentation there. Then the only other one I've got is that we have at the council a new lead for the Better Value project, Ben Stevens, who's sat at the back of the room there, who is exploring the most efficient ways to provide further scrutiny into local authorities who he's looking at basically the deficit in the high needs block and how we can get better value out of SCND and the spend, but he will be working with us with scrutiny to look at perhaps those who do not have a deficit in the high needs block and ways in which we can follow some of that practice if it is good practice. I know Ben of old, good choice, welcome to the council, Ben. Future work, any questions on any of that? No, good. Future work programme, you've got the future work programme attached. I think it's a much more readable format now so you can see what's coming up. As ever, if there's something you think should be in the future work programme, please, please, please talk to one of us about it and we'll try and make sure it's there. Otherwise, date of next meeting is on Wednesday, 20th of September. So we'll see you then. There is urgent items. I don't have urgent items, but I do have one item I forgot to ask Marie to put on the agenda. which we can't make a decision on today, but I'd like to take a straw poll on, if I could, just of opinion, which is, Lucy looks worried, no worries. There's a growing organisation working under Wiltshire Community Foundation of bringing together community youth services. So people are providing services to young people, youth clubs and all the rest of it. I had intended to ask that we put on the agenda that we invite them to send a non-voting representative to sit on this committee, so that they've got a voice coming in to us in the same way schools have a voice and so on and so forth, if the schools ever sent anyone. I forgot to do that, but as a straw poll, is there any objections to us looking at exploring that as a route? It's a similar thing to we did when we first said to FE. Some of you will remember you can come along because FE weren't on here previously. So brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye. 5 minutes. I think that's quite impressive. Only 5 minutes over at the end. Oh, bloody miracle. We had to do that. It was you.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no.